So KM can happen throughout the research cycle and should. It's not just a dissemination piece. It's not it's not just pushing the research out. There are roles for that, and that's good. But knowledge mobilization works throughout the research cycle, so engage your users, whether those users are school teachers, or they're gallery people, or they're artists, or they're media folk, or they're bankers, whoever. Engage your users in thinking about how would we plan this research. And then involve them in the execution of the research as well. Make sure it's not tokenism. You're not just going to the population and surveying them. You're engaging the population themselves. We have a project called Mobilizing Minds. It's a CIHR team grant, and it's mobilizing knowledge for young adult mental health. And we've got young adults, and some of the mental health consumers are on every project team, and they're on the leadership team, and they're making substantive decisions, and some of them were on the grant application. So it's real important right at the front end to bring them on when you're thinking of planning. Evaluate when the evaluation, use them, but honestly the fun does come in the dissemination. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do here. One of the neatest things, unfortunately we never got it going, but I was called by Edith Wumbai is a community-based researcher affiliated with the Wellesley Institute in Toronto, and she was working on the experiences of African women with HIV/AIDS in Toronto. So she wanted to apply to the Ontario HIV/AIDS Treatment Network. And she wasn't eligible because she wasn't a faculty member. So she called up and said, do you have anyone who can help me, who I can partner with? So we introduced her to Tamara Daly, who had just come out of her postdoc, a new faculty member whose work was in women with HIV/AIDS. Not African women, but we partnered them up. And we were looking at supporting the grant application, because that's what Nancy and I do for our faculty. And I was reading the application. I said, what's this line, $2,000 for theater? What is that? She said, that's how my community talks to itself. Yeah. And so we went, oh, that's so cool. So we threw a bit more money on there, and we matched her up with one of our fine arts creators in the Faculty of Fine Arts who looks at the use of theater as transmitting messages to school kids. So now we had this really nice team of a community-based researcher, an academic researcher, and a theater creator. And they didn't get the money, unfortunately. But it was a wonderful partnership, and they're still searching for those funds. So theater, we have Gail Mitchell is in our School of Nursing, and she's got a Shirk Standard research grant that she wrote a play about the experiences of families with a family member who has Alzheimer's. And that play isn't about the person, it's about the family. And this play teaches, and so she teaches those experiences and helps support decisions that families can make. So she got a Shirk Standard research grant to study the stuff around that play.
I think it's important in telling that story. I mean, in telling the story, you say that they didn't get the money, and so people go, oh, well, then why bother, right? There's a strategic part to it. But we actually have to think about, as we're developing that infrastructure, and this is, again, thinking as a system, Shirk's only 30 years old. It didn't exist before. It was a division of the Canada Council at one point. And under the Mulroney government, it almost disappeared, right? They were going to collapse it back into the Canada Council. Its budget was, I think, $67 million at the time, and they were going to cut it to $30 million, right? I mean, that was the discussion, right? So one of the challenges in any field that's emerging is that you'll have builders and maintainers. You'll have people who want to build it, and you'll have people who want to maintain the status quo. And there's a fundamental tension between those two, and that tension is actually really important because you want to move in the right direction. You want to move where you're going to make investments that are going to, right? I mean, just to give you an example, Shirk is in fact not a private club for the academy. What it is a partnership between some very highly trained people around the country and the people of Canada with their tax dollars to actually produce things that are of value, that you're producing knowledge because it has value, right? That's the premise for engaging in research in the social sciences and humanities and the natural sciences and engineering and health sciences and all sorts of other disciplines, right? That there's actually something that is of value that will be produced by this activity. Now, if there's not a program that funds that type of work, but there's people across the country that say this is actually how we communicate, and this is how we learn, and this is actually how we build our knowledge, that just means that the appropriate infrastructure isn't in place yet. It doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means that the places that can support it are not necessarily present yet. And I think that's an important thing to think about in terms of knowledge mobilization. And it's actually one of the characteristics, aside from openness, is that being an entrepreneur isn't that self-define as a social entrepreneur. Entreprendre just means to undertake, right? I risk, I organize, and I manage for defined purposes. It happens to be within business, but there are entrepreneurs within the academy, there are entrepreneurs within not-for-profit agencies. And in fact, I haven't seen any leader within a not-for-profit agency that isn't first-class entrepreneur, because they cobble resources together from all sorts of places to pull it together.
Great timing, because now I'm back online. So, is that cool? Where KM? So KM isn't a thing that happens at a time. It's a process that we engage in throughout the thinking of our scholarship. So when I presented at Peter's session on HR, one of the questions we asked was, well, what does it look like? What is the skill set for a knowledge broker? What are the qualifications? And we've already said there's no training for knowledge mobilization. We're finding often these folks have got master's degrees, not PhDs. I'm going to talk in a few slides about an intern program we ran, and most of those were geared at the master's level. It's not that PhDs can't, but by the time you've gone into a PhD, you're fairly directed towards a style of thinking. So we're finding master's students more than PhDs usually are coming into a knowledge broker capacity. Being a writer is a plus. You know, we've got a project that Shirk funded us to create standard form research summaries of single studies, and so we worked with an adult literacy practitioner who's skilled in plain language writing, and the first writer of our studies was a poet. You know, so he's doing his PhD in English, and he was a poet, and he didn't write them in poetry, but he just had that way of concisely and clearly thinking about communicating messages. And being communicators, having more than one sector experience, being a boundary spanner. What we find is that most of the KM interns that we bring in, which is, I'll tell you about that, they've already had volunteer experience somewhere else, or they've had a job where this was engaged in, so they're a scholar plus. And that's really, really valuable. We find in technology transfer to have worked in a company and worked in the university is a good combination to have. So how do we grow this profession? This is nothing to do with knowledge mobilization yet, but this is a book that came out in 1998 by Cynthia Robbins-Roth called Alternative Careers in Science. And it was a really, really valuable book for me, who had a PhD in science. I just started in tech transfer, and I was wondering, where can this go? And this book has a chapter written by a practitioner in tech transfer, business development, venture capital, scientific journalism, and all of these practitioners, and it's a day in the life. What is my day like? What are my highs? What are my lows? What are my challenges? How was my career path? And that was a wonderful book, because it took everyone had a PhD, and none of them were in the lab. Okay, so a wonderful book around science. I think it would be cool to look at our jobs and have a book like that. And one of the value propositions of knowledge mobilization to government, to decision makers who fund research, is look around. Everyone in your ministry, minister, whether it's a policy maker, a policy analyst, a director general, an ADM, a deputy minister, they all went to university. And they were all taught by faculty members, most of whom had scholarly careers and research careers. And if Shirk didn't exist and invest in the social science humanities, their experiences would have been very, very different. So knowledge mobilization also is not just about products and about knowledge that we push out, it's about the people that we train as well. And so a book like this would be really, really cool to grow. So one of your projects that doesn't exist yet.